This is the Montana Outdoor Podcast, brought to you in part by Rocky Mountain Truck and Trailer in Missoula, home of Boss Snowplows, CM Truck Beds, and Diamond Sea Trailers. Just go to rmtte.com for more information. And by Superior Hardwoods of Montana, home of the largest selection of in-stock high-end wood products and flooring in the western United States. Let them guide you through the woods at superior-hardwoods.com. Now, get ready for more fascinating topics and the most interesting people you will ever find in Montana's great outdoors. We offer new podcasts most every Saturday. You can get a link to these podcasts by going to our website, montanooutdoor.com, or by going to our Facebook page, or just send an email to Downrigger at montanooutdoor.com and say send a link to my email. It's that simple. Now let's head out with your host, Downrigger Dale, and see what's going on in Montana's great outdoors.
Thank you very much, Manny. And as my good buddy Manny said, this is Downrigger Dale with the Montana Outdoor Podcast. Thank you all so much for joining me. Want to always say a very special thank you to our men and women in the armed forces that listen regularly. I have so many of you that listen to this podcast all over the world, and it's our honor to have you along here. And I hope this podcast brings you a little bit of home as you're out there protecting us here in the good old U.S. of A. So thank you so much for joining us. Also, all of you that are around the world and around the rest of the United States, of course, it's the Montana Outdoor Podcast, but you're welcome to, and sure love to have you along as well. My email is downrigger at montanooutdoor.com. Feel free to email me with any questions, ideas, or thoughts. I'll give you that email. Well, actually, Manny will give you that email address at the end of the podcast, too. Other quick note is be sure and share this podcast with your friends and neighbors. We love it when you spread the word, and that helps us grow, and we have grown so much. Wow. Thank you all very much. It's been crazy how much we've grown over just this last year. So anyway, yeah, share it and let your friends know that, of course, you find it on montanooutdoor.com. But it's available, on about 20 or 30 sites all over, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, on and on. So real easy to do that. In fact, that's an easy way. When you sign up on Spotify, Apple, or any of those, you can actually subscribe, and then it'll remind you when a new podcast is out. But as Manny said, we do it every Saturday is when we release most of our podcast. So if you were listening to last week's podcast, we started a series on how to find the right boat for you. And that series was just really popular. I think it helped a lot of people, and not just first-time boat owners, but for people that, maybe want to trade up or down or whatever. It was just a great way to get you information and kind of get you thinking as far as, what do I need to think about? Because there's a lot of variables. These boats are pretty amazing these days. Kent Anderson from Warrior Boats, want to thank Kent for joining us and kicking the series off. And Kent gave us some great ideas and that. But one of the people we talked about during that podcast is my guest this week, and that's Matt Cowen of Mon-Dak Marine. Matt is, of course, a Warrior Boat dealer, but also Matt just has tremendous knowledge. In fact, I gave him the nickname, the Wizard of the Waterways. I don't know if he likes that nickname or not, but it kind of stuck. Matt, thanks so much for joining me and being part of our How to Find the Right Boat for You podcast again.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Now, Matt, this, it seems like every year boats, I don't want to say they get more complicated, but they certainly get more technical. They can do a lot of cool things, and technology is getting and going in that. So when a person says, let's say they own the boat for 5 or 6 years, and they say, I'm ready to get a new boat. All of a sudden they start looking, and boy, there's a lot of choices and a lot of things to consider, and that's where this podcast can really help out. So, Matt, I wanted to start with you. Folks that listened last year and of course anyone around the Glasgow area, Fort Peck area knows Matt Cowen of Mon-Dak Marine. But Matt, tell us just a little bit about yourself and how you got into the boating industry.
Well, I grew up in Big Timber, right on the banks of the Boulder River where it runs into the Yellowstone. So Grew up fly fishing, my deep roots, fly fishing and guiding fly fishermen in the Big Timber area. And then actually went off and played college basketball in Glendive, and that's where I was introduced to the warm water side of things. Fort Peck, for sure, near and dear to my heart there. So I bought my first boat, was a 1956 Sea King with the 40-horse Ted Williams Johnson on it.
Wow.
And it leaked like nobody's business. Yeah, it was quite the boat. Took on lots of water, caught lots of fish out of it. But yeah, I think to date, not counting, boats we have here at Mon-Dak, I think I've owned like 14 different boats, which, yeah, that's a fair amount. My wife probably is always nervous when I said, I'm just looking.
Yeah. Yeah, that can be a bone of contention with couples. Sometimes it's the other way too. Sometimes the wife gets all into them too. But yeah, that's when folks go, nah, you never just look. You usually come home with something.
Yeah, there's always, whether it's tackle from the local store or a boat or, yeah, I hear you.
So you started out guiding and doing all that, and how did you end up with Mon-Dak Marine? Tell us a little bit about how you got into that and about Mon-Dak Marine.
Well, Mon-Dak Marine was started in 1996 in Plentywood by Alton Smith. So, we're on our 28th year of a Montana business, which is really fun to be part of that. I worked for Shields for 20 years in Billings. So being around electronics and boats and all the fishing equipment, I've always had a passion for electronics, and boy, that industry is just growing leaps and bounds. The previous owners run it, and Brandon Babb, I was helping them do a few seminars up here and, giving advice where I could on inventory and things like that. And one day out of the blue, Brandon called me and asked me, if I was interested in owning Mon-Dak. And of course, first thing went through my mind was, how am I going to break this to my wife? I want to buy a boat dealership.
This time you're not just coming home with a new boat. You're coming home with a whole dealership.
That's 270 miles away. How's this going to work? But, long story short, absolutely love it. Very thankful to be part of the Glasgow community. Feels good to be back in a small town. And, we hit the ground running, and we're just doing the best we can.
And we'll talk a bit about the different brands you carry as we go along, but let's just cover the tops of the trees. What are the brands that Mon-Dak Marine covers? Of course, we know Warrior Boat is one of them because
Correct.
We talked about that with Kent Anderson.
Yep.
What other brands do you carry?
So on the fiberglass side, yep, we've got Warrior, we've got Yarcraft, and we've got Camus, which is fairly new to the industry. And on the aluminum side, we've got Crestliner on their deep V side, and then lots of the Crestliner jet boats.
Yeah, I was looking at the Camus ones because I was not familiar with them. And I was looking on your website, and those kind of intrigued me.
Yeah.
Those are some interesting ones, and we'll get into those a little bit. But, yeah, I mean, even the saltwater ones are pretty dang cool. We may have to talk after this podcast.
Those big saltwater center consoles they're beautiful boats. Yeah, there's a neat story behind Camus.
Well, we'll get into that in a bit. But one of the things I'm really trying to focus on this year, Matt, with our series on how to find the right boat for you is talking about matching the boat that you're looking for with the water that you're going to be out on. And first of all, folks, don't get me wrong. You can take any boat on pretty much any waterway, but for example, if we talk about Fort Peck is like literally right out your front door and down the road a ways, you're on a huge lake. And so, yeah, you can take pretty much anything out on Fort Peck, but if that's where you're going to boat most of the time, That comes into a big consideration, doesn't it, as far as picking what kind of boat you're going to get?
Absolutely. And I think the key there is the safety factor. How many people do you take with you? What type of fishing you like to do? Do you hunt and fish out of that boat? There's lots of things to look at, and the biggest boat isn't always the best boat. You just have to find one that, fits your needs and makes sense financially.
Okay. So once we, study that, and I guess some of the considerations there, when we're thinking about it is, we get into all kinds of things, and this is a common problem that I hear. In fact, when I first started owning boats, that was a mistake I made, I kind of wanted to do a boat that fits all things. And the problem was that I ended up really, liking to travel around with my boat a lot. And the boat I got just really didn't suit for that. What are some of the things when we're considering where we like to boat? What are some of the things we consider? Obviously, one is going to be weather. What about when we think about depth and things like that? I know boats have gotten pretty amazing, but talk a little bit about that.
Well, I think one of the things we have to look at in our area is sometimes we drive on gravel roads for quite a ways.
Oh, yeah.
And we've all had issues with a blown tire. So I really like to try to upsell a customer into a tandem axle trailer, 2 tires on each side, because if you do blow one and maybe your spare is good or isn't good, a lot of times you can still make it home by tying up that axle because you got one good tire on that side. So tandem axle trailers are really important to me because it's really not that uncommon to have 50 miles of gravel to get to where you're going to drop the boat in, at least around here on Fort Peck or maybe Tiber and things like that.
Well, really, when you think about Montana, it's a huge state, and I guess in some ways, it's kind of a cool thing that there's not a lot of people, but sometimes you can be a long way from services. I didn't even think about that. So that's a really good point as far as is trailering and all that. Another tough one, I think, are the variables that we come across when we think about, okay, what are we going to use the boat for? And this one gets to be tough because sometimes we just flat don't know. Let's say you think, okay, all I love to do is fish for lake trout, and then all of a sudden you find another species you fall in love with, and you go, I want to do that. Well, is there a way to get a boat that kind of fits all different species? Tell us about some of the thinking we ought to go through there.
Yeah. If you, let's just say, got a 20-foot aluminum or fiberglass boat, that boat's going to do everything that you want it to do, whether you're fishing lake trout, salmon, or chasing walleyes, whether you're using forward-facing sonar. There's options that are available in any boat to do that. But a lot of people get nervous on a shallow-sided boat. People like a deeper boat sometimes. Let's just say the Warrior, they're nice, deep back to the boat. It makes you feel safe.
Yeah.
There isn't one boat that's going to do absolutely everything you want to do. That's why there's so many different awesome boats out on the market. But, looking at the depth in the bow is important. Test driving the boat is really important. If a customer comes here and is looking at purchasing a boat from us and they want to go drive it, we'll just head to the lake and go for a drive, no different than test driving a new truck.
We were talking.
That's a big deal.
Kent Anderson and I were talking. I'm glad you brought it up because he mentioned that too. He said, if you go look at a boat and the dealer doesn't want to take you out on a test ride, you're at the wrong dealership right there.
Sure.
Because you're right. We're talking, these boats are expensive, and you better get out on the water and consider it. Now, do you recommend maybe bringing along, say, like, let's say if you're going to have your wife fish with you a lot, or maybe your kids go out a lot, is it a good idea to bring them along for the test ride, or does that get a little too crazy?
No, bring them all. Absolutely. Whoever is going to fish with you, family, friends, bring them, because then you'll see how the boat performs with, all the passengers in there. You'll see how it rides. And honestly, if it's a little bit windy, that's even better, because you can see, based off of those conditions, how the boat handles. Is it going to be a wet ride? Is it going to be a dry ride? You just learn a lot about every boat. Rides a little bit different. Every boat's set up a little bit different. Lots of room in the bow on a Yarcraft or a Camus, more room behind the windshield on a Warrior. That's the fun part about it, is fishing or going for a ride in the conditions that you're going to be out in anyway.
You make a great point there. My wife, and I'm not saying this is why we got divorced, but when I got the first boat that was just too hard to move around, we go to this next boat, and I thought it was really cool. It had the low profile. It would get out across the water. She liked to go out on the boat with me, and so many times we'd get going out, and she'd say, "That's it, we're turning around. This is just getting too crazy for me."
Yep.
Water splashing, all that. And I never thought about it, which maybe that's why we did get divorced. I didn't consider that. But that's a really good point. It is a good idea to bring him along then, isn't it?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it's not just when you're in the water, it's unloading and loading, seeing how well it loads. Because a lot of times maybe you're by yourself, or it is a husband-wife scenario. And unfortunately, I've seen several arguments happen at boat ramps when it isn't getting loaded or unloaded the way that one or the other would prefer. So yeah, absolutely, bring them along.
Yeah, in fact, probably shouldn't say this, but the captain and I, we used to go to Holter Lake a lot, and we would get the camp spot right by the boat ramp just because that was a lot of fun to watch.
It can be a lot of fun, and it's probably not right to sit and listen and watch.
I know, but
you get a kick out of it.
Yeah, but you watch this and you say, "Wow, this fishing partnership or even a marriage is not going to last with this," because it becomes a very difficult thing. Now, is that by nature of the trailer, the size of the boat, or just some boats just flat harder to load than others?
Yeah, I think a lot of it has to do with the conditions you're in. A lot of the ramps around here are fairly steep, with the low water conditions. And it can be hard to back a trailer down when you can't see the trailer.
Mm-hmm.
And then loading the boat, notoriously fiberglass boats being a little bit heavier seem to track a little bit easier. But knowing the depth of water that you're putting the trailer in, meaning, okay, if I was going fishing with you, I'd say, okay, back it in to where the water, the fenders are just 2 inches out of the water, because that's the sweet spot. Mm-hmm. So you learn a lot about, how the boat likes to load and things like that. But you figure it out. You get a pretty good partnership, and it's fun to watch people that do it a lot, how quick they can be.
Yeah. Captain nicknamed me when I'm backing up the boat the Snake, because I tend to slither around.
You're not the only one.
But that I learned. But that's one of those things that if you can't see the boat, that can get tough. And that's a good consideration. I'm glad you brought up, because in Montana, boat ramps, depending on, and this kind of goes back to what we were talking about earlier, that we were talking about where you go. Well, if some of your favorite lakes have some pretty primitive boat ramps, then that's another thing you really want to consider, especially,
absolutely,
getting out early in the season and things like that, or late in the season, and water levels get different, and you go, I can't use this boat a lot of times during the year. So,
Yep. If your boat's too big, that can be very difficult as well. So,
and folks, we're going to get into technology too. In fact, while I'm thinking about it, I just want to remind everyone, one of Matt's big time fortes here is electronics. And boy, do those play a huge part of that. We're going to get into that a little bit in this podcast, but Matt has agreed to come back and actually do a whole nother podcast just about technology in boats. So be sure and check your listings for that, because that's going to be a good one. Now, we're going to take a quick little break here, but when we come back, I want you to think about this one, and that is managing expectations. And this is an important one. Yeah, you find this boat that seems to do all the things that you want it to do, and, it still looks pretty cool too. But so often we don't think about what it's going to take to maintain it. And that can be a nightmare down the road if you didn't consider that. So we're going to talk about what are your expectations, how to think about that when choosing a boat. That and more is coming up right after this. I want to talk a bit about a very special company located in western Montana, Superior Hardwoods of Montana. They were established in 1977, and since that time, guiding customers through the woods has been their passion throughout their history. The main focus at Superior Hardwoods of Montana has been to provide the finest wide plank flooring and unique building materials available anywhere. One of the things I noticed right away about the owner of Superior Hardwoods of Montana, John Medliger, and his son Corey, and the rest of the staff there is they're very proud to offer the largest selection of in-stock flooring in the western United States. See, for over 40 years, they've been known for leading the industry in reclaimed and antique building materials, and the success that followed has allowed them to, now get this, stock over 11 acres of stunning architectural lumber that awaits the perfect addition to your home. One thing I want you to remember is just because they're located in Missoula, Montana, that does not mean they can't help you turn your home into a piece of historical art if you live somewhere else. They have been guiding folks from as far away as Hawaii and beyond through the woods for many years. So no matter if your project is located across the street from them, across the state, or somewhere else in the world, they can't wait to turn your house into a dream home. Their goal is simple. They stand ready to deliver the best choices with reliability and honesty, helping at any phase of a project with inspirational advice. And I'm not exaggerating when I say they actually treat their customers as friends and family. So the choice is yours. But if I were you, I would go to superior-hardwoods.com. superior-hardwoods.com. Of course, you're more than welcome to call them, 406-235-7452, or, they'd love you to visit 5120 Highway 93 just south of Missoula, Montana. They can't wait to guide you through the woods at Superior Hardwoods of Montana. Go see them. You're going to love what they do to your home. And we are back here on the Montana Outdoor Podcast. I'm with Matt Cowen of Mon-Dak Marine. Mon-Dak Marine carries 3 great lines. Of course, service does new and used. We're going to get into a lot of that too. But Matt, one of the things I brought up before we went into the break was expectations. And this is a big one. And that is, okay, I find the right boat, I think. It's got the right height, for my grandkids. I don't have to worry so much about them, going over the side, things like that. I've got it all figured out. But there's the maintenance issue. Has that changed? Are most boats pretty easy to maintain, or is that a big one we want to think about just from not just the what you have to know to maintain it, but just the fact that it can cost you a lot? Talk about that.
Well, whether it's new boat or used boat, the most expensive part on that boat is the motor or motors.
Mhm.
And as we all know, the 4-stroke era is here. You can't even really buy a 2-stroke motor anymore. And 4-stroke motors, well, more parts and pieces, which, if something goes south, it ends up costing a little bit more, no different than gas or diesel. So something to look at, if let's just say you're buying a used boat and maybe it has a Optimax 2-stroke on it, still fantastic motors, but the longer time period from when that motor was built, the harder it is to get parts. And that can be something to really consider if you're buying a used boat that maybe is 20 years old, which really isn't that long ago.
Right.
Finding some of these parts can be very difficult. As far as worrying about the new 4-strokes, it's motor oil and gear lube and a few spark plugs. And we have the computers here to test all diagnostics on Mercury motors, which is really nice. There are lots of Mercuries around here, lots of Yamahas, Suzukis. They're all great motors. It's just sometimes when you're buying a new boat, I would really consider the area that you're most likely going to fish in and make sure that it can get serviced there.
Oh, yeah.
That's important. These motors these days these big motors are almost $50,000 just for the motor on the back.
Right. Well, you bring up a fantastic point, and a good buddy of mine, I still feel bad for him because he got all excited about this great buy on this really kind of off-brand, really interesting boat. Drove, what was it, like 800 miles to pick it up, got it. First year went great. Started to have some problems. It was a used boat when he got it. And that was the big issue.
Yeah.
He everywhere he took it around Montana, and this was over in northwest Montana, everywhere he took it, they said, sorry, pal, we don't know anything about that. And, we could probably get parts, but, see you in 2 or 3 months.
Yeah, it can be very frustrating. And, boats are so darn expensive that if you're going to put that investment, you want to make sure that it can be serviced correctly and efficiently, because we've all had issues where you can't get parts and it can be 6-7 months before it shows up, and pretty soon fishing season's over.
Right. Yeah, our season is a little short, though. Thank goodness for technology and a lot of other things. In Montana, we've been able to stretch our season pretty good, but that's just a nightmare when your boat's in the shop and everybody's having a great time. So recapping this issue, folks, and make a note of this. If you're getting this great deal and this great buy on that wonderful used boat, boy, it's got low hours and all that, do your homework. Where you love to fish, can you get it serviced? Call around, find out.
Sure. Yep.
Yeah, that's
absolutely
super important, because that's gonna save you a big one. Now, of course, people that listen to the Montana Outdoor Podcast, a lot of them also listen to our radio show, the Montana Outdoor Radio Show. It's safe to say we love fishing. So how much of the type of fishing that we do, the species we go after, all that should dictate the kind of boat that we get? And the point there is, you look at down south, bass boat, it's barely off the water. And those guys, that's all they fish, bass. Then we get into walleye up on Fort Peck, and we got the Warrior with its nice deep. It handles all kinds of water. Talk us through that. What are things we better consider there?
Yeah, you just have to decide, we all like to fish different presentations and different techniques. But if you absolutely love to pull cranks, and 90% of the time you're behind the windshield, it's okay to have a boat with more room behind the windshield for you to maneuver around with your passengers. But let's say you're always in the front pulling bouncers or pitching jigs, or, if you're in the forward-facing sonar craze, sometimes there's 2 or maybe even 3 people up in the bow of your boat looking at a graph. You need a little bit more room in the bow. So every boat is built different for sure, and there's so many good ones out there. But keep that in mind, that if you're just normally you love to fish behind the windshield and that's your place, you can pick a boat that has more room back there. Absolutely.
hmm And, there's a lot of you that are listening to this podcast that may have just moved to Montana or you're going to move to Montana. We've seen quite a migration, especially as COVID hit. A lot of people said, I've had enough. I'm moving to a state with real people and nice people.
There you go.
All that. And so they started moving here. And one of the things I think for folks like that come to Montana and maybe don't know a lot about, I think it's a good idea because you may not even know what species you want to go after. Before you go out and, spend a pile on a boat, hire a guide. Go out and try a few things. Find out what really turns your crank. Then you can go see Matt and say, okay, I have found out I'm a walleye freak. That's going to help you help people, right?
Yeah, and storage is a big thing as well. If you're a walleye guy, or I guess even salmon, lake trout, smallmouth, we all end up taking more tackle than we're probably ever going to use that day. And so look at the different storage options in the bow, in the back. How do the live wells set up? Are you going to add downriggers to your boat in the future? Is it going to be easy? Is it going to be tough? There's lots of things to think about. And just like any other time, we always add stuff to our boats. But knowing that when you buy the boat that it is going to be able to be added is sure nice, not only for a dealer, but obviously the end result, the customer's happy.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Good point. Now let's get into propulsion. And boy, I mean, you can actually see arguments get started over this one. In fact, I had a discussion a while back, sitting around with some friends at Fort Peck Marina, and we were having a few beers after a long day of fishing, and we were just talking with a bunch of different people, and this guy said, I don't know why you guys spend all this money on these prop boats, because then you're kind of stuck. Since I live in Montana, I absolutely would never own anything but a jet boat, because that means I can go about anywhere.
Sure.
Well, okay. Then, somebody else chimed in and said, wait a minute. You can go anywhere, but really, if I'm spending most of my time on Fort Peck, is that really the most efficient way to get around? Talk about prop versus jet. What are some of the, good reasons behind owning one or the other, and what are some of the downsides?
Sure. Well, everybody knows that a jet can go through shallower water. That's the end result. But they also track way different than a prop boat because they normally don't have as deep of a keel which would be the bottom of the boat to allow it to track straight. You put a prop boat on, you're adding more keel, so to speak. It allows you to track better when you're going at slow speeds. I know lots of guys that take their jet boats out on Fort Peck, and the first thing that you hear is they just don't ride as good in bigger waves as a boat with a prop on it. Either way you look at it, boats are not efficient as far as fuel economy. Jet boats notoriously do drink a little bit more because you're usually sacrificing a little bit of horsepower because all you're doing is just moving water.
Right.
There's nothing spinning, a propeller spinning to propel you through the water. So that, again, I see lots of big, nice hard cab jet boats out fishing salmon and lake trout when it's cooler. Fantastic boats. But I don't know if there's just one boat to be able to do it all. You sure wouldn't want to take a big prop boat on the Missouri River down here too far.
Yeah.
Because it's going to get expensive if you hit something. But lots of jet boats, more and more you find out that, again, customers will end up buying a lake boat and then they want to go fish the river too. So then they'll come in and we'll talk about, our Crestliner center console jet boats. And I absolutely love the river, near and dear to my heart. And I don't think that I could just pick one boat to do it all. Unfortunately.
Yeah.
That's a tough one.
Well, and I think that's a good point. When we talk about budgeting, and this is something I've seen a lot of people do. And just like you said, once they do it, they go, I am so glad I didn't spend everything that I had budgeted for a boat on one boat. So we should think about that because, and here's why, in my opinion, and that is if you get a river boat, which you don't have to spend a pile on a river boat, but a nice river jet boat, think about this, whether it's Fort Peck and using your nice deep V and your prop boat out on Fort Peck and then using your jet to go down the Missouri, or let's say you're up on Flathead Lake, same thing, and now you got the Flathead River and all that. There are a lot of times when it's just not comfortable to be out on the big water.
Yeah,
well, rather
exactly
than
right.
sitting there watching and doing nothing, you hook onto your little jet, off you go to the river, and you're back fishing again. I mean, is that how much do you sacrifice the big boat to be able to have both? Or, I mean, is it really affordable, or is this something we really need to save up for?
Well, boats are not affordable. Let's just be honest. That's just how it is.
They're a luxury, yeah.
Yeah, you wouldn't want to keep track of what a pound of walleye costs because if you're like me, I think it's close to like $25,000 a pound. Yeah, that's a great question. You can absolutely take a center console or any jet boat out on the lake. You can. If the waves get bad, it's not going to be comfortable. You're going to get wet. And I'm not talking the big hard cab. I'm talking, a 18 or 19 foot center console jet. You can absolutely do it and you'll be fine. If you know how to drive in the waves, you'll be just fine. But it opens up a lot of opportunity to be able to go to the Fred Robinson Bridge and put your jet boat in and just go for a ride and enjoy the beautiful scenery. Or if you can only afford one boat and you absolutely love the river and maybe you're going to fish the lake in the bays from time to time, a jet boat is the answer. But if you just fish big water, and it's not just Fort Peck, Canyon Ferry, Holter, Hauser, all that country. Yeah, nothing beats a nice deep V multi-species boat.
Right. Yeah. Well, that's something we really want to be thinking about, folks, because, again, these are big ticket items and you want to make sure you do it right. Now, this next topic that we're going to get into, and I think we'll go ahead and take a break here because we may spend a little time on this one. If I ask 50 people, what's the best horsepower for just a good all-around fishing boat, I'm probably going to get 50 different answers. So when we come back from this break, Matt, let's talk about horsepower and what the gives and takes are and that. Of course, money is a big one, but there are some major considerations to think about as far as what you want to do with the boat that will dictate the kind of horsepower you need. So we'll talk about that when we come back right after this. I know our regular listeners to this podcast have heard me talk about Rocky Mountain Truck and Trailer, but for those of you that are new here, let me start with the basics about Rocky Mountain Truck and Trailer. They are your locally owned Boss Snowplow, CM Truck Bed, and Diamond Sea Trailer dealer. They offer a wide variety of auto, truck, and trailer accessories and specialize in sales and service of trailers. Rocky Mountain Truck and Trailer is conveniently located at 5680 Expressway in Missoula, Montana. Now, let's get into the stuff that truly makes them special and why they are the ones we recommend if you ever need a new trailer, a snowplow, or just need service and or advice. Let me give you an example. They carry the best snowplows on the planet. That's Boss Snowplows. So that way, when you get sick of just getting by with what you have or sick of spending a fortune to have someone else plow you out, you can come tell the folks at Rocky Mountain Truck and Trailer about what and where you need to remove snow, and they will help you find the perfect Boss snowplow to get the job done right now and likely for the rest of your life. I'm going to tell you something about these Boss snowplows that just amazes me, but I truly hear about it all the time once someone I know buys one. They always say something to the effect of, you know, Rigger, I never thought I'd say this, and I know it sounds crazy, but I actually have fun plowing snow with my Boss snowplow. And crazier yet, I like it so much I actually look for places near me that need plowing and ask property owners if I can plow it for them. Gang, I'm not exaggerating. That is the Rocky Mountain truck and trailer difference. They carry the equipment that not only is perfect for you, it actually becomes part of you. So, gang, don't end up hoping you get the right snowplow, trailer, or truck bed. Just go to rmtte.com. Look at what they have, then call them at 406-549-4243. Get all your questions answered, and then go have fun this winter. Thanks to Rocky Mountain Truck and Trailer. Go see them, rmtte.com. That's Rocky Mountain Truck and Trailer. Hey, thanks so much for being part of the podcast. Downrigger Dale here with Matt Cowen from Mon-Dak Marine. We're talking about how to find the right boat for you. And we for sure have the right guy here with us today. Matt Cowen has really been helpful in helping us, decide what are some really good things to consider. And we'll get lots of other opinions from lots of other people down the road here too as this series goes on. But let's get into a big topic here, and this is something to really super consider, and that is horsepower. Some say, hey, it's overrated. I don't need to go 60 miles an hour. I'm not a professional tournament fisherman that has to get to that hole first. Others say, I want that horsepower there because it gives me a lot of options. Talk about horsepower and why we choose higher or lower horsepower when we're deciding what to put on the back of that beautiful boat we've chose.
Sure. Well, most of the boats, at least on the new side here, and on the used side when we take in a used one, there's a Coast Guard placard on the boat that says max horsepower. Mm-hmm. And let's just say it's a 21-foot Yarcraft, and it says max horsepower is 400. Well, we all know you don't need 400 horsepower to make the boat go from point A to point B. But I think sometimes people don't realize that when these boats are designed, in order for them to perform the way that they're built in all aspects, they do recommend putting the maximum horsepower on there. And it doesn't have to do with speed. It just has to do with, for example, if you're in 5-foot waves, how's that boat going to perform going up and down those waves without spearing the wave, so to speak? Or what's the best ride that it's going to have? Because these motors are heavy. The new V10 400s are 710 pounds. That's a lot of weight hanging off the back of your motor or back of your boat. So it's all about the performance on what they're designed for. And some people will say, well, I'll just put a 300 on there to save money. You sure can, and we'll do it. That's totally fine. And then they might say, I'm just going to use less fuel when I use a smaller motor. Well, not necessarily. It all has to do with your RPMs that you're running that motor at. If you put a 300 on a boat and you want to go 40 miles an hour, let's say you're going to be turning 4,500 RPMs. Well, the higher the RPMs, the more fuel you use. Oh. But if you had a 400 on there and you wanted to go 40 miles an hour, you might only be turning 3,800 RPMs. So it's not a fuel economy thing. Boats aren't designed to be good on fuel. If you can get 3 miles a gallon out of a boat, that's pretty good. It's kind of crazy to think that 60 gallons in a boat and you fill that up every single day, it gets really expensive. So
it really does.
Yeah.
So, and just hearing you talk about this really just brings up the point that not only do we need to take care in making this decision of what's the right boat for me, but also picking the dealer that's going to help you make that decision. You just brought up some things that, and I'm not knocking, but there are some people that, hang a shingle and say, yeah, I'm a boat dealer and I handle a lot of different stuff and I do used boats and so on. They aren't going to think that part through for you, that the boat that you picked, let's use, for example, the Yarcraft. Okay. And I come in and I fall in love with that Yarcraft that you've got there. My family loves it. We've crawled all through it and all that. But now we start thinking, boy, if we go down in horsepower, I can make this fit in my budget. That's where a guy like Matt's going to go, whoa, wait a minute now. That might be a big thing to regret, right?
Yeah, and they're going to perform great. They're going to do more than you expected, regardless of what size motor you have. But for that boat to drive and act the way that it was designed to, it is recommended to have the maximum horsepower. But I think a lot of people, none of us have just bought one boat and that's it, my one lifetime boat. That doesn't happen very often.
Yeah. So
you have to think about the resale value down the road. If you have a boat that has a 400 on it or a 300 or a 150 and it's not max horsepower, sometimes customers might balk at that a little bit because they understand that that boat was designed to have that max horsepower on it. So the resale value, being able to sell it or trade in later, is something to think about as well.
Mm-hmm. So that's where we find a really good dealer and you say, okay, I love this boat, but really, what's the horsepower that can make this boat do what it's supposed to do? That's a great question to ask that dealer. So you understand that yeah, you might have saved money, but in the long run, you really didn't.
You're going to save money up front for sure. And I know that it takes a long time to justify a $10,000 or $15,000 savings when you're just thinking about fuel and things like that. And you're not wanting to go faster. These motors these days are just fantastic. I would recommend buying a boat that has the maximum horsepower on it. You don't have to run it wide open. I'm not saying that, but it's going to perform the way it was designed to.
Okay. Now you brought up brands, Mercury, Yamaha, what else? Gee, my mind went blank there for a second.
Suzuki. There's a few Suzukis around. Yeah.
Sure. Is there a brand that you like, that you think that's a good brand to put? Because really, any boat, whether it's Yarcraft, whether it's a Warrior, or what, you can decide what you want on the back of that boat.
Yarcraft, Warrior, and for sure you can pick whatever you want. Some of the, like Crestliner, I can only put Mercury's on because it's owned by Brunswick, who owns Mercury.
Okay.
So something to think about there. But obviously I'm really partial to Mercury because I have Mercury certified technicians here with all the diagnostics software. So we can take care of Mercury stuff, no problem. And we do service other brands. Yamahas are really popular and they're fantastic, very reliable, good on fuel. Suzuki's, there's a few of those around. I think they're a fine motor too, but I don't have the software to diagnose a major issue. So, there's other dealers in the state that are Yamaha and Suzuki as well, and they're great. But like we talked about earlier, just make sure you can get it serviced in a reasonable amount of time, or you're going to be high and dry, so to speak.
Is there a brand that probably you can get fixed no matter where you're at in Montana? Would that be Mercury? Is that probably the safest?
Mercury and Yamaha I think are real close. There's some great Yamaha dealers in the States. So I think those two motors are the two most common motors in Montana, would be Mercury and Yamaha.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So since we're talking about motors, let's talk about kickers. The kicker, I guess it depends on the kind of fisherman you are, but I rarely see any fishing boat that doesn't have a kicker on the back of it. Talk about how we select the right kicker for our boat.
Well, it all depends on the size of your boat. The two most common size kickers are the 9.9s and the 15s, and they're both EFI 4-strokes, so they're fantastic. The main thing for a kicker, and people think, well, for trolling, for sure, 100%, but we've all had our big motor quit working, and maybe we are 3 or 4 miles away or 10 miles away from the ramp. It sure is nice to know that I can make it back on my kicker and we're going to be okay. Mm-hmm. So that's a really big thing to think about, is just the safety side of things, of knowing that I can make it back.
Yeah, it's probably not easy to paddle a Warrior 40 miles down the
Chances are pretty good you're going to end up on the shore. Yeah. We've all had issues where life isn't good that day. Mm-hmm. But as far as the size, the shaft length is important, and that's all boat dependent on how big or deep that transom is. There's a electric start, power tilt and trim. They can have their own throttle up by the big motor throttle to where you don't even have to get out of your captain's seat to drive it. There's tiller models that are just, you can save a little bit money doing that. Something to think about there is, if you do decide to get a kicker and you already maybe have a kicker that's a tiller and you have a trolling motor in the bow, an electric trolling motor, a lot of guys can just put that kicker down, put it in gear to give you that propulsion, but you can steer really well with your bow mount, where you don't have to be hanging on to your tiller handle. So that's something to think about as well.
Yeah, and then you've got that remote in your hand for your bow mount, so it really, really comes in handy there.
Absolutely. So, increases boat control. Yep. Mm-hmm.
So since we brought up the trolling motor, the bow mount motor, which, again, that's another thing. If you look at any fishing boat, you're probably going to see one of those on all the time, too. That little guy can really become a workhorse. You ask somebody what's the best bow mount to have, boy, you get a lot of different opinions. You have any opinion on what's the most reliable electric?
Well, Minn Kota has a really strong foothold in our area. There's different models of Minn Kotas, from the Tarova, which is a manual deploy and stow, to the Altera, which everybody's had horror stories about. Alteras. Minn Kota has done a lot of improvements in those. More often than not, it's all about battery maintenance when it comes to issues with your trolling motors. So if you take care of your batteries and you replace them every 3-4 years and make sure they're charged when you go out and play, they're all very reliable. If you're a foot pedal guy and you want to add some of the forward-facing sonar to the existing trolling motor, then the Ultrex is the way to go. Again, another Minn Kota brand. But I think more than anything, sometimes you want to think about how big your boat is, how much weight you have in your boat for a load, and then making sure you have enough power on your trolling motor, whether it's a 24-volt, 36-volt, or a 12-volt. It's always better to have more power than you're really going to need, because you don't want to run these trolling motors on that 6, 7, 8, 9 for extended periods of time. It can be tough on them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and since we're talking about batteries, and I'm sure we're going to spend some time on trolling motors and how you can integrate a lot of technology with them when we do our technology podcast with you. But one thing is that's a huge consideration. And in fact, I remember when Captain was deciding, what's the right Warrior for me and all that, a lot of it did start to come down to battery space.
Yep,
because
absolutely.
What am I going to be adding in that? Talk a bit about that, because that's a big consideration I think a lot of people overlook.
Yeah, I'll tell you what, more and more often we're adding more batteries to boats, and we're trying to find space that can work. Most of the boats anymore have 5 batteries in them. And 3 of those batteries would be trolling motor batteries. A lot of times they're in the floor or under the rod locker between the walk-through windshield. And then you've got a cranking battery, and with all the electronics, a house battery. So that's a lot of weight
Yes.
and room that they take up. Be mindful of that when you're looking at a new boat or a used boat, on how many batteries am I really going to need and where am I going to put them all?
Right. Because, if you're going to want every bell and whistle that's out there, and nowadays, I'm going to tell you what, be sure and tune into that technology one, because you're going to hear about lots of bells and whistles and things that are going to really make you a great fisherman. But where all those batteries go, and, like you said, where's the room, but then just the weight and where it's placed and how that makes the boat sit where it sits. And I mean, there's a lot to consider there.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, we've kind of covered a lot of different stuff here. So now let's talk a little bit about aluminum and fiberglass. And again, that's another one where you ask 50 people, you're going to get 50 different answers as far as what you think it's, how it should be and what it's used for. Why do we choose fiberglass, and why do some people say, gotta have aluminum?
I think the first thing that always comes to mind is the ride. Notoriously, a fiberglass boat rides better than an aluminum boat. Now, that's not always the case, because it's not always apples to apples. But I think more often than not, a guy has to think about where they fish and how much gravel they're going to be going on. I personally don't like to take a fiberglass boat down a bunch of gravel, because I don't want nicks and possible gel crack in the front of my boat. We've got protectors from rock protectors and the whole 9 yards. But aluminum boats, a lot of times people feel like they can take them down gravel roads with less wear and tear. And I think there's something to be said there. But again, it comes down to the ride most of the time. Between a heavier fiberglass boat compared to the same boat being aluminum, they're both fantastic boats, and you see lots and lots of them out there. It's a personal preference. It's the Ford Chevy scenario. Mm-hmm. They're great. Just go drive them, and hopefully you get to drive them in some wavy conditions, and you'll see right away which one you prefer.
Well, and that comes back to that test ride, doesn't it?
Yep, absolutely.
You really need to do that. Another major decision that we talk about here is new or used. And, budget can drive that a lot. But, I mean, there are some great used boats out there. I mean, let's face it. When you add up the amount of time a boat in Montana gets used, it's certainly not as much as, say, a boat in Florida. So what are your thoughts there? How do we decide, new or used? And then we get into, okay, if used is our way, are we going to Craigslist? Are we going to Mon-Dak or what?
Well, yeah, the new used thing, it's all usually a financial position. Some of it's warranty. When you buy something new, you do have warranty on the motors, and that can be a peace of mind. But as far as finding the right one, usually the good used boats get sold before they even hit the market through word of mouth. Mm-hmm. And if you know people in the boating world, or even if you don't, I have customers come in all the time that will say, I'm looking for a used Warrior. Here's my price range. Let me know if you hear of anything. Mm-hmm. And I've got a list of people, and I help pass on that information to prospective customers from others. Word of mouth is probably the most powerful way of advertising or selling something. If you know the person who had that boat on a used side, and you know how they took care of it, how many hours are on it, things like that, that's important. You don't want to buy a boat that's 10 years old that has 700 or 800 hours on it. I mean, not that it wouldn't work fine, but that's a fair amount of hours for a 10-year-old boat. So there's lots of things to look for. And customers call me all the time and say, hey, I'm looking at this boat. here's the price. This is what it has on it. What do you think? And I can ask a few questions for them to ask the owner and help them make that buying decision. Absolutely.
Wow. Well, that's great to know. Matt, in my opinion, though, and I guess it's because I got burned one time buying a used boat in a private sale.
Yeah.
I just flat won't. I'm going to go to a dealer.
Sure.
And I think there's some big advantages there. One, the dealer has to stay in business. And if they sell you a big pile of junk, word gets out. Let's face it, we're small towns.
Yep.
That dealer's not going to stay in business. So he or she's got to take care of you. I think that's a big reason to go. The other thing, back to service. Here's a person, a dealer's not going to put something out there that's a nightmare for that reason. They have gone through it. They know what's out there. So I don't know. That's just my opinion. I would much rather do that. So since we're on that topic, do I trade? Let's say I'm moving up. I decided I'm going for the new Warrior now, or the new Yarcraft, or that. What do I trade in, or do I sell my boat privately? A lot of people say, "Oh no, sell it privately because you'll get a lot more money for it." Is that true?
Well, yes. The trade business is a very difficult business, because if you trade your boat into me, I'm unfortunately not going to sell it for the same price that I gave you for it, right? That's just how business works.
Well, yeah, you got to keep the lights on and all that. Yeah.
Let's say I think your used boat's worth $25,000, and then I'm going to give you a number, and we see if we make it work or not. But I also do a lot of consignment things for customers, to where the customer drops their boat off here, I advertise it, and I end up selling it for that customer. But the transaction, it's still his boat. It's not my boat. I just help him sell it for a small fee. And that's another option. You're always 90% of the time, I think that if you try to sell that boat on your own and you have the time to sell it, you're going to get more money. That's just how it is. And I recommend doing that. If I was trying to sell a personal boat, I would for sure try to sell it on my own. But if I don't have the time to do it and I want to get into the new boat, trading is the quickest, but sometimes it's not the most financially smart move. That's just being honest.
Yeah. Well, and I guess the way I look at it, and again, back to personal preference, and thank you for being honest about that, because sometimes we don't get that honest answer. But sometimes, I guess the way I look at it, I would much rather do the consignment thing or do the trade thing, because small town Montana, I sell the boat and something happens, it's going to come back on me, and now especially, let me tell you this, don't sell a boat to a friend. Because, wow, you never hear the end of it. There's always
going to be issues with boats and motors, and it's just a matter of time, unfortunately, before something happens. And I understand how that can be a bit of an issue.
Yeah, I guess I'm saying I'd rather people yell at you, Matt, than me.
Okay, fair enough.
Okay. So before we wrap it up here, this might be a tough question for you to answer. What do you feel are maybe 2 or 3 of the biggest mistakes people make when deciding what boat to get?
I think the first thing that happens is you don't think about it and give yourself enough time to make a logical decision. So it's more of a knee-jerk reaction. These are huge purchases, and I think you really got to think about how you're going to use it. Is it going to be something that's going to last you a long enough time to where you're going to be comfortable? The other question is the add-ons that you're going to put on it. And it's not just electronics. Maybe it's you want a canopy or a bimini top or side curtains. Can we do that? Servicing is another really important topic. Make sure you can get it serviced in a reasonable amount of time in Montana, a couple 100 miles at least, to where you can get back out on the water. So just ask lots of good questions. And if you're not comfortable with the answer you get from a dealer, ask another dealer. There's lots of great dealers that have good information, and we're not always right, but we'll help you make the right decision and we'll figure it out.
Mon-Dak Marine.com. Mon-Dak Marine, Mon-Dak Marine.com. Now, before you scramble around trying to find a pin to write that down, if you just go to the podcast description, I've got that right there in the description. Just click on it, and boom, it'll take you right to Matt's website. And there you're going to be able to see everything about Mon-Dak. And what's really cool is you're going to get to take a look at some of these brands that he carries that are really interesting. Before we go, let's go over those one more time. Let's start with Warrior and go from there.
Yeah. Yep. We carry the Warrior fiberglass boats in the 208s and the 238s. We've got Yarcraft, 209, 210s, and 219s. We've got Camus in a DV22 and the DV20s. Those are the fiberglass side. And on the aluminum side, we've got a couple different Fish Hawks from Crestliner, and then a full line of 3 different sizes of jet boats. So, we've got a boat that can get you out on the water.
If you're going to fish in Montana, I don't care if you're a river rat or if you're a lake monster or what you are, Matt's got the boats. So now you have some pretty good questions, some good thoughts of how you got to go through this. So spend some time on the website. And as Matt said, very graciously, talk to dealers, sit down and really do this decision right, folks. And you're going to end up having so much fun. You're not going to be a slave to your boat. Your boat's going to be working for you. And boy, have I seen it so many times not go that way. In fact, I renamed one of my boats Diva because I spent more time scraping, painting, never get a big teak boat. What a nightmare. That's just me. I was young, I was stupid, okay? But anyway, there's just a lot that we could go to, and we're going to cover so much more when I have Matt come back, and we're going to get into the whole electronic side of that, because that really comes to play in your deal. This electronics are here to stay, and they're also can really change the way you boat. So be sure and listen to that. So now I'm going to do one thing I love to do, and you can just say, Downrigger, shut up. I'm not going to do that. But finish this sentence for me. Mon-Dak Marine is...
Mon-Dak Marine is... That's a really good question.
Mon-Dak Marine is... Sounds like we're on a game show, doesn't it?
Yeah. I'm going to say deep roots. We've got deep roots from 96, and you sent me a list of questions, and you'd mentioned something about a tree.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. If you were, I was kidding.
If I was a tree, what would I be? And I think I would be a ponderosa pine.
I would be a deep-rooted ponderosa pine.
Yeah, the state tree. I think that's it. No, in all seriousness, Mon-Dak Marine's just here to help you make the right decisions and just to take care of you. You know, that's our goal, is just take care of customers. And do we make mistakes? Yep. But how we handle them is the key. So
hmm And this guy here, he's very humble, but there's a reason he's called the Wizard of the Waterways, and that's because the guy really, really knows his stuff. And that's the great thing about a professional dealer, whether it's Matt or some of the others I'll introduce you to as we go along. You're going to find out these guys have passion. And I think that's a good way to leave it here is when you decide what kind of boat you want, taking in all these great ideas that Matt gave you, think about the boat and the dealer kind of come together. So make that decision too. And that's where you want that honest answer. You just got a bunch of them here from this guy. Real honest answers, straight up, and the ability to stand behind what they do.
I appreciate it.
That's what you do, my man. Well, anything else before we head down the road? I know I've taken a lot of your time, and you got probably tons of things you're trying to work on there, but anything else before we go?
Nope, everything is great. I really appreciate the opportunity to visit with you, and let's hope this snow goes away and get the ice off the lakes. Let's get after it.
Right on. That's MON-DAK Marine.com. MONDAKmarine.com with that little hyphen in it. And again, I'll put the links there. I'll put a few other links so you can just click right in and learn a little more about Matt, the history of Mon-Dak, and then spend some time on that website and really dig into it. It's some not pretty. It's really cool stuff on there. And see what's out there. So there you have it, folks. There's another group of ideas and thoughts on how to pick the right boat for you. Don't hurry through this, but one thing I want you to do and think about is don't get frustrated on this. You know, you're going down the right road right now thinking, I'm going to get a boat, or I'm going to upgrade and get the boat I've always really wanted. I'm going to tell you what, if you're not a boater, you really got to get into this. It's so much better than sitting in front of the TV. Montana has so much to offer, so I hope you'll get out there and enjoy it. Again, any questions, we've got links. I'm going to put a link so you can email Matt if you want. You'll just click on it. Boom, your email will just pull right up, and you can ask him any questions. You can ask me any questions, and we're gonna help you. We're going to get through this, and we're going to get the right boat for you. Thanks so much for tuning in to the Montana Outdoor Podcast.
Thanks for listening to the Montana Outdoor Podcast. It has been brought to you in part by Superior Hardwoods of Montana, home of the largest selection of in-stock high-end wood products and flooring in the western United States. Let them guide you through the woods at superior-hardwoods.com. And by Rocky Mountain Truck and Trailer in Missoula, home of Boss Snowplows, CM Truck Beds, and Diamond Sea Trailers. Just go to rmtte.com for more information. So what did you think of today's podcast? Send your questions and comments to Downrigger at montanooutdoor.com. We should be dropping a new podcast this next Saturday. Until then, we will see you soon out in Montana's great outdoors.